In a village nestled between mountains where the sun rose late and set early, hope itself was the villagers' greatest prayer. What they held in their hands was little more than that: small and large fields plowed through summer, animals driven to pasture, and a thin thread of hope that kept them standing. Houses scattered across two opposing mountain slopes faced one another, as if silently watching across the valley. At first light, villagers would rise, gather together, and set off toward the high pastures in horse-drawn carts, leading their herds ahead of them. Since each family's land lay close to the others, cooperation had long ceased to be a choice. It had become a ritual woven into daily life. The largest family belonged to Thomas. He lived with great hopes on his small farm at the entrance of the village, a deeply devout man who never missed a church service and instilled the same devotion in his children. Thomas had 2 sons and 2 daughters. His eldest son and daughter were married and lived in separate houses within the same farmstead. Thomas's greatest joy was spending time with his grandchildren, telling them stories about life, and about what lay beyond death. Whenever he went to church, he insisted they wear clean clothes and took them with him without fail. Directly across from his farm, high on the ridge of the opposite slope, stood the house of David, a man Thomas had known since childhood. They had rarely been apart from the village for as long as they could remember. David's eldest son, Sam, was strong and imposing, yet childlike in spirit, and had never married. Though this once saddened David, age had softened his worries. Sam's strength and devotion to helping with the farm and fields had become indispensable. Whenever David faltered or grew tired, Sam would rush to his side and finish whatever task remained. In his spare hours, Sam also tended Thomas's animals, feeding and watering them and keeping his farm clean. As the seasons followed one another, each brought both ease and hardship, all of which were endured together. Once again, winter announced itself with harsh, icy winds, and preparations throughout the village began in earnest. Before winter arrived, the barns housing sheep and cattle were repaired. Dry tree trunks gathered during summer were cut by communal effort and stacked in sheds. Dried vegetables, fruits, and staple foods were shared with anyone who lacked them, distributed through collective labor. The villagers asked only one thing of God: protection from calamities that defied the natural course of life, and from unexpected illness. One early morning, Thomas and David rose to carry out their final pre-winter inspections. Thomas owned a young horse he dearly loved. Its white mane had grown so long that he took pleasure in brushing it. He kept the horse near the entrance of the main barn, separated slightly from the other animals. David suggested that the horse should now be moved to its own shelter. Though Thomas agreed, he had no separate stable to house it. A few days later, David mentioned the issue to his son. Sam went to Thomas's farm and began planning a small shelter for the horse. He decided that a spot at the front of the barn, facing the opposite slope, would be ideal. Since it lay adjacent to the family homes, it would also be protected from the harsh winter winds. As Sam traced the outline of the wooden shelter in chalk dust, Thomas joined him. After discussing the plan, Thomas felt entirely confident in Sam's design. Over the following days, Thomas and his family prepared the necessary timber, while Sam spent his spare hours completing the final arrangements. The first blow of the pickaxe struck the earth. Thomas's children and Sam took turns digging the foundation, carrying the soil away to empty sections of the garden. On the final day, the pickaxe rested in Sam's calloused hands. With the last strike, something pale caught his eye, a fragment of bone. As he brushed aside the soft soil, several more bones emerged. Sam was puzzled. The village cemetery lay far away, and what he saw made little sense. Choosing not to dwell on it, he assumed the bones belonged to a long-dead dog or sheep, left them in the pit, and returned home. He was exhausted. After dinner, he spoke with his father about the day's work. David felt deep gratitude toward his son for helping his dear friend Thomas, and that gratitude filled Sam with quiet pride. It was a windy night. Fatigue carried Sam quickly into sleep. He rarely dreamed, until that night. In his dream, a very old, hunched figure stood in the middle of nothingness, its face and hands deeply wrinkled, walking toward him with the aid of a staff. It came close, seized Sam by the arm, bent him forward, and whispered into his ear. "Every strike of your pick disturbs me greatly, my son." Sam awoke in the early hours of morning, shaken by the dream. Unable to make sense of it, he chose not to tell his parents. In less than a week, with the help of Thomas's children, Sam completed the shelter. He added a small window on the side facing the opposite slope so the horse could breathe freely. On the first day, the horse was tied in front of the shelter to help it adjust. The next day, Thomas's happiness was unmistakable. He embraced Sam and thanked him deeply for his effort and dedication. "Sam. At the next church service, I will pray for you. Without you, we never could have built such a proper shelter before winter set in. May God be with you, my son." The white horse quickly grew accustomed to its new home. Each morning, Thomas brought his grandchildren to check on it, brushing its long mane. The horse's calm demeanor and apparent comfort brought them great joy. Winter had fully revealed its cold face. Snow piled up to the knees, and villagers cleared the roads one by one. Precautions were taken for the weekly postal carriage, the only vehicle that carried the village's voice beyond the mountains. The road into the village was covered with ash and burnt coal fragments, a crude but necessary measure for the old and unreliable carriage. One night, without warning, frantic neighing rose from Thomas's farm. Hearing the noise, Thomas and his family rushed to the shelter, turning their oil lamps to full brightness. Fear was unmistakable in the horse's eyes. It was restless, agitated. They could make no sense of it. Thomas stayed beside the horse, embraced it, and only returned home once it had calmed. They assumed wild boars, which descended into the village in winter in search of food, had unsettled the animal. By morning, everything seemed normal again. Endless snowfall, a white sky, and a white earth. Thomas and David met to attend church. As they moved slowly along in David's cart, they talked as usual. At one point, David asked Thomas why he checked the horse shelter every night. Thomas was startled. "There must be a mistake," he said. "We only went there once after hearing the noise. Every night since then has been normal." Now it was David's turn to be surprised. "I'm certain," he insisted. "My wife, Sam, and I have seen light reflecting from that shelter window on several nights. I'm not joking. Please take me seriously." Though they reached the church, Thomas's mind lingered on his friend's words. For the first time in his life, he could not focus during the service, and guilt weighed heavily on him. On the way back, they spoke no words. David dropped Thomas at the entrance of his farm and returned home. That night, Thomas lay awake, trying to understand. Could it have been his children? His grandchildren? Who would enter the shelter repeatedly in such bitter cold? In the days that followed, matters grew stranger still. Night after night, Thomas and his family were plagued by nightmares. Strange footsteps echoed through the house. Distant screams rose from deep within the darkness. Fear and helplessness took hold of them all. Rumors spread through the village, and unease followed. Thomas sought out the village priest and told him everything. The priest suggested witchcraft and advised spiritual cleansing rituals, but this made no sense to Thomas. He had no enemies. No one wished him harm. One night, as the village lay buried beneath cold and white silence, furious knocking shattered the peace. At the door stood David and Sam. Thomas leapt from his bed and opened it in terror. They urged him outside at once. They had heard sounds and seen strange lights coming from the horse shelter. They rushed there together. Inside, they were met with horror. The horse was drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. Most disturbing of all, its white mane had been meticulously braided. They led the horse to David's stable. Until dawn, they searched the shelter and its surroundings, but found nothing of note. David himself found little peace in taking the horse, yet hoped it might help his friend. For a few days, things seemed to return to normal, until that cursed night. The silence of the night was shattered by the horse's screams. David and Sam ran toward the stable. As they approached, the violence of the sounds and the presence of that blinding light shook them to their core. Though terrified, they entered. Sam held a sickle in his hand. He opened the door slowly. What he saw was no different from what he had witnessed days earlier in the shelter he himself had built. The horse's eyes had turned red, its face twisted in terror. They tried to pull it free, but the young, powerful animal flung them aside. Growling, it slammed itself against the walls, as though desperately trying to escape its own torment. As David and Sam struggled to decide what to do, Sam remembered the bones uncovered during construction, and the hunched old man from his dream. The words echoed once more. "Every strike of your pick disturbs me greatly, my son." There was no time to explain. Sam understood. The grave of that old man lay where he had dug, and the restless spirit, disturbed by the horse's presence above it, had possessed the white animal. At that moment, the horse lunged at David, striking him down. David fell motionless. Driven mad by the sight, Sam plunged the sickle into the horse's heart again and again. The animal collapsed, bleeding, suffering, and soon lay still. Neighbors and Thomas, drawn by the noise, watched in horror from a distance. Sam sat on the ground, utterly drained, unmoving. Silence gripped them all. Thomas and the others slowly approached, lifted Sam, and led him outside. Blood dripped from his hands onto the white snow. His face remained empty, silent. "There you are again," he said. No one understood. Someone handed Sam a flask of water, but his hands reached toward empty space, searching where the flask was not. In that moment, he understood. For the rest of his life, he would see the world through darkness. His sight had vanished as he struck the horse, but blindness was not what terrified him most. For as long as he lived, behind his eyes, wherever he turned, he would see the furious face of the hunched old man, and he would never be free of it.